Taoiseach, the independent audit of hip surgeries at Children's Health Ireland and the National Orthopaedic Hospital CAPA is damning. It makes for devastating reading for parents and families who are caught up in this scandal. One of those, a heartbroken mother, contacted us. Her daughter was just 4 when she had surgery on both hips. And this mother is convinced, based on her reading of the audit report, that her daughter didn't require either operation. Here's what she wrote. I am gutted to have let my daughter down. I'm the person who's supposed to protect her. I'll have to live with that. After her operation, I'll never forget what she said to me. I didn't ask to come here, Mammy. She walked into that hospital but had to be carried out. Learn how to walk again, night after night for weeks, screaming and crying from muscle spasms. Thank God she's now back to herself, but I have no doubt that she will have those memories for life. And I have no words left, only tears. 2,200 letters have been sent to parents, and all of them now ask themselves the same question. Was my child put through the trauma of surgery that wasn't needed? Taoiseach, you had said that the response to this scandal would be to put the children affected and their parents first. But yet, families heard of the publication of the audit through the media. They weren't provided with a copy before it was published. Parents also report that they're being fobbed off by the hotline set up to deal with their queries. And last night, parents received their first communication from the hospitals since this audit was published. A very blunt, very insensitive letter inviting their child to an appointment and written in bold stating that only one parent can attend. Who do these people think they are, treating distressed parents like that? At a meeting on Sunday evening, parents expressed anger naturally and also deep, deep concern about the independence of review and assessment processes from CHI. They ask, how can the very organisation that presided over this scandal have any involvement in any review? CHI is mired in scandal and catastrophic governance failure, unnecessary hip surgeries on children, unauthorised springs in children's spines, and we also hear a CHI consultant was delaying treatment and referring public patients to his own private clinic, being paid thousands through the National Treatment Purchase Fund. The failure of government to immediately establish and put beyond any doubt the absolute independence of all of the expert panel has led now to a real fear amongst parents that this will be largely in-house within CHI. And there's been no excuse for delay, Taoiseach. Your government have been aware of this scandal for an entire year, but your failure to prepare means that parents now face that cruel prospect of waiting months with stress and worry before they can find out if their child was operated on unnecessarily. Tishmahori Fólca cúpla mí fana chun fólamach cura lana faoi obrád gon gá, sin tura chur chuig amal an rialtas. Taoiseach, the government now really needs to get its act together and do right by these families. So can you guarantee that every child who's had these hip surgeries since 2010 will have their case reviewed to determine if the operation was necessary? And crucially, can you assure parents that the expert panel will be entirely independent of CHI?
Taoiseach to respond.
Príomhrod ná, gur an rud is táchtaí ar fad ná, na leanaí agus fór na hoibríide se, agus go háire na Tishmahori, agus é an príomhaim an rialtas ná takeíocht agus cá a chóirt das na taigligh éagsúla agus táim anna bhórtha ar fad féin méid atá á héileú ag an tóras-cáil seo a d'fháil siad mííonna se chaite. Could I just say at the outset that our overriding consideration will be the children upon whom these operations were carried out and the families. That is the #1 priority of government and indeed of the Minister for Health. The findings of the audit are shocking. very, very grave. And our first thoughts have to be with the children and the family. In terms of the communications, and make sure there shouldn't be a limit of one parent on any meeting. In my view, parents, or at least a mother or a father, or may require support at such a meeting. That should be readily facilitated. Would make the point, the audit was external. So I think it's unfair to put aspersions on the government's motivations, suggesting that somehow it would be an in-house. The audit was external, conducted by Simon Thomas, consulted to orthopaedic surgeon at Bristol Royal Hospital for Children. And in the figures, 60% of procedures in Temple Street not clinically indicated in accordance with the criteria established by the author. In Kappa, 79% not clinically indicated. It's beyond comprehension, but we need to find out why and how did that happen. But the most immediate priority has to be the follow-up for the families. And the individualised letters have been sent out by CHI and by Kappa. And an expert reference group with international expert input is developing the criteria against which future multidisciplinary team assessments will be made, and that will be in place within the next 2 months. But in terms of the retrospective review, fundamentally, it has to be external, and a separate process involving external experts is being established for this purpose by the HSE. The Minister has asked the RCSI to assist in bringing together a multidisciplinary external team to examine all cases that were going back over the period of time in question, which allows for about a 15-year period in terms of skeletal maturity and so forth. The Minister for Health is expediting the establishment and engagement of external experts to review these cases, not just surgeons, radiographers, and other disciplines as well. The issues raised the most fundamental concerns about clinical performance itself, clinical governance, and yes, overall governance within CHI. Other matters that the Deputy referred to in respect of a report that was published in the Sunday Times. The Minister was notified of this, I think it's Sunday afternoon, or Saturday afternoon, via immediate inquiry, had not been alerted to the existence of that internal inquiry report conducted by CHI. That too makes for shocking reading of the most profound kind, which not just goes to the heart of, in my view, the misuse of NTPF funding, but more seriously raises very fundamental concerns at that time about safety for children receiving surgery.
Deputy MacDonald.
So I think it is now abundantly clear for anyone who wishes to see that clinical governance in general at CHI is absolutely a fiasco. I know that 3 members of the board have resigned. I put it to you, Taoiseach, that the remaining members should follow suit, because clearly what is needed here now is root and branch reform and change, transparency and accountability. And the parents, I voiced these concerns around the independence of this reference group, the full independence of it from CHI, because that is the concern that parents are bringing to us. They have been catastrophically failed. Trust levels are on the floor. This involves perhaps unnecessary surgery on very, very young children. And every effort, if you're true to your word that parents and children come first, and the absolute independence needs to be given. Can you give us that assurance? Can you assure us also, Taoiseach, that every child who had surgery since 2010, that every single case will be independently investigated and reviewed?
So the immediate priority is the clinical follow-up and care of patients who've undergone this surgery. And this does represent a very fundamental and serious breach of trust. the most fundamental breach of trust. And as I say, there will have to be further investigations in terms of why this occurred and how it was allowed to occur. And in terms of the retrospective look back, I've said it will have to be externally done, involving multidisciplinary teams to make sure that that independence and that confidence is in the process from day one. I will make the point, of course, that 98% of the procedures and surgeries within Crumlin were clinically indicated. And I would also make the point there are many very good, high-quality people working in CHI generally too. That should be acknowledged. But there are very basic issues of clinical governance, clinical leadership and clinical performance, and indeed overall governance of the hospital that are clearly raised and emerge from this situation.
Deputy Ivana Bacik of the Labour Party.
Well, Taoiseach, the controversy surrounding Children's Health Ireland has somehow managed to escalate yet again over recent days, and instead of focusing on the vital task of caring for our children, CHI is presiding over an increasingly chaotic string of failures. Failures, Taoiseach, with devastating consequences for sick children and their families. And you've said breaches of trust there, and I think that's very clearly evident too. The use of unapproved non-surgical springs in children's surgery, horrifically the carrying out of unnecessary pelvic bone operations on children to the desperate distress of their parents and the children themselves as they learned what has gone on. And you quoted the figures there, they're stark. 60% of surgeries at Temple Street not clinically indicated. And yet more horrors outlined by John Mooney at the weekend. The abandonment of vulnerable children, actually described by staff as orphans, left stranded in hospital receiving substandard care long after best practice indicated they should have been moved on. The carrying out of specific treatments, apparently for the personal profit of certain clinicians, and a bitter and toxic internal culture within CHI, described as chaos behind closed doors. It all begs the question, what on earth is going on within CHI? Who is actually in charge? And a question that has become even more urgent as we learn that 3 more board members have resigned just today. A drip feed of resignations, we might say, after the stepping down of the chair in April. Taoiseach, by our count, there have been 4 externally commissioned reviews of the care provided by CHI over the last 3 years, which show failures of culture, failures of clinical care and management, which are systemic and endemic. What's important now is that children and their families will see accountability and justice for the failings of the past, and we need an assurance that children will receive the best care today and into the future. So we need to see accountability, not just individual heads rolling and nothing else changing. We need to ask and answer serious questions about whether CHI has capacity as an entity to do its job. So Taoiseach, this requires your urgent attention and that of the Health Minister. We welcome Minister Carol McNeill's engagement on the issue over the weekend. I listened carefully to her interview just an hour ago on radio. But we need decisive action. As my colleague, Deputy Marie Sherlock, our health spokesperson, has said, the CHI should now come under the direct control and oversight of the HSE. Until that happens, it's very hard to see accountability. Because what we have now is the ridiculous situation where the HSE is answering questions about scandals for which it does not have direct responsibility. In December of last year, the Irish Times reported former Health Minister Stephen Donnelly had sought legal advice on whether the state had power to take over the running of children's hospital services in Dublin. And reportedly, that advice was sought due to concern over issues around scoliosis surgery waiting lists, delays in appointments, and outrageous overspends with the National Children's Hospital. And now we have these recent, very serious revelations. So, Taoiseach, can you give assurances that there will be real accountability for all the many failings within CHI? What can you say to assure us that there will be real change?
Taoiseach to respond.
First of all, there has to be accountability. I would agree with the Deputy in that respect. Also, one would have thought that the era of an individual consultant being an independent republic was long gone. Clearly not the case in the context of these reports and the one that you've been quoting from, which I think is the subject matter of the Sunday Times articles, if I'm correct. And the imperative of multidisciplinary teams being in place across the entire system cannot be overstated. That report that you referred to, which I had looked at late last night, is deeply, deeply worrying and relates to a whole range of issues. But the more fundamental one in terms of the overall context of issues that you've used, or language you've used, really speaks to an environment that is not, to put it mildly, not optimal for safety of patients, and an absence of a proper team-based holistic ethos within the CHI group and within the hospital here in particular. And I think in terms of governance, I think the Minister has said that governance is an issue of fundamental concern to the Minister also earlier. And so we need an immediate follow-up, clinical follow-up for those impacted by the hip surgery and the pelvic surgery. And then we need, in addition to that, we need accountability and to find out why and how so many children who didn't require operations had operations. And thirdly, the Minister has appointed, or is in the process of appointing, 2 members of the HSE board to the CHI board. We have to evolve the governance now of CHI, conscious that we're moving to a new hospital as well, which in itself will demand significant governance standards and capacity. And we have to do so in a way that does not disrupt the thousands of procedures that are ongoing within CHI. There's a new CEO has come on board there. We have to work with the new CEO. And I know the Minister and the HSE will work closely to buttress and to underpin governance now in the short term within CHI. And yes, we will have to look at a sensible evolutionary pathway to change governance. I would make the overall point, in health, historically, institutions have been too strong to the detriment of patients. If you look at what happened in education, the big revolution was that learner became central to education, not the institutions. In health, the patient must be central, not the ethos of any particular foundation or any particular historic hospital or whatever. And invariably new structures get formed to accommodate the history and the historical background of certain hospitals. That's what has happened essentially in terms of CHI. And I think we do need to move on and evolve this into a proper governance framework.
Taoiseach, I do agree with you. This is clearly an environmental, a cultural, a systemic failure. And of course, the parents and children most directly and desperately affected, of course, they require urgently an independent review. But we do need to hear more from you and from your health minister, and you as a former health minister, of course, about what are the systemic changes that are going to be made to address this much bigger failing that is clearly at the heart of these terrible individual tragedies for these children who are now being told that they may have had unnecessary surgery. So what are you and your government going to do to address the systemic and environmental issues that are going on within CHI? As I say, a drip feed of resignations from the board is simply not enough. That's just twiddling at the edges. What we need to know is what's going to change to ensure that there is a proper culture within CHI that ensures that individual clinicians cannot run amok, cannot abuse the National Treatment Purchase Fund, cannot be carrying out procedures apparently in a sort of vacuum, in a splendid isolation, without that sort of holistic approach that you so rightly say is necessary. Parents and children require a real sense of systemic change from you.
I agree, and although I do note last week, maybe not you, but others were looking for the resignation of the board, tantamount to that. But that was put to us. A drip feed of resignations is not the answer here, obviously, and I think the Minister is very clear on a number of steps and a series of steps. The immediate one is clinical follow-up that will be external and independent and can give the necessary reassurance to parents in particular, and what could be young teenagers now and children in respect of surgery that they went through, that they can have that external look back, and that would be independent. In terms of within CHI, there has to be a very fundamental commitment to a multidisciplinary team-based approach across the entirety of all disciplines within CHI, all surgical, and all areas of medicine. That's absolutely critical. And thirdly, the Minister has said that governance is a key issue. I agree with the Minister. I think there has to be a fundamental look at governance as well in the immediate time ahead. But we must avoid, which will involve the HSE, in my view. which will involve the HSE.
There
But
may be
again, we have to
further.
do things in a way that does not
Thank you,
disrupt
Taoiseach. Time
urgent
is up.
procedures that
Deputy
children
Cian
require
O'Callaghan
today
of the
and
Social
next week.
Democrats.
Taoiseach, Children's Health Ireland is in crisis. Another 3 members of the board have just resigned today. A succession of scandals has cast serious doubt on its capacity to provide quality healthcare to children in this country. Common thread in each of these scandals is an almost complete absence of clinical oversight. Medically questionable and unethical practices proliferated under the noses of highly paid clinical directors and management teams at Children's Health Ireland and CAPA. The HSE and the Department of Health were either kept in the dark or didn't notice. Clinical oversight and governance systems failed. Children were not protected. They suffered extremely painful hip surgeries. It's unthinkable to think that any child would be put through this trauma unnecessarily. Taoiseach, what we need now are all the facts, full transparency and accountability from Children's Health Ireland, but can we trust them to provide that? They sat on a 2021 report which was highly critical of one of its consultants. That report found the consultant earned more than €35,000 by keeping very young children on a waiting list for years. They were eventually treated using the National Treatment Purchase Fund when they were transferred to the consultant's weekend clinic. But they could have been treated by other doctors years earlier. When all of this was discovered, it was kept a secret, and the consultant was allowed to retire and sail into the sunset. Taoiseach, the final audit of hip surgeries has confirmed that nearly 80% at CAPA and 60% at Temple Street could have been unnecessary. The high prevalence of surgery at these hospitals was not a secret. Parents of some of the children were told they would not have been operated on if they were at Crumlin. At the time, they thought they were lucky. They were led to believe their children were getting cutting-edge treatment that wasn't available at Crumlin. Now they fear their children suffered agony and trauma of surgery unnecessarily. Taoiseach, and you've said it yourself, the era of consultants being utterly unaccountable is meant to be over. The system of clinical directors was introduced in 2008, nearly 20 years ago. But is it working? None of the issues identified in the Children's Health Ireland were detected by clinical oversight. They came to light because of whistleblowers and a random review. Even when potential fraud and abuse of waiting lists was detected, the wagons were circled. The HSE, the Department of Health, the National Treatment Purchase Fund and the Medical Council were never notified. Taoiseach, will you confirm that all the children operated on will have access to an independent clinical audit by international experts? And will the Government commission a review of the system of clinical directors to determine why alarm bells did not ring?
First of all, again, I reiterate that this is a shocking report, the report into hip operations on Friday. Absolutely. The variation between Crumlin, for example, that has 98% that were clinically indicated, has to be stressed, to 60% only in Temple Street and 21% in CAPA. Like, the variation alone from an external independent author sends all sorts of alarm bells ringing. And we have to find out, how did that happen? Why did it happen? Why were children operated on that didn't require any operation? It's incomprehensible, unethical. It's just unacceptable. We've got to get to the bottom of this, because it goes to the heart of trust and confidence in our health system and in clinical judgment and clinical performance. It goes to the heart of clinical performance, whether people like us saying that or not. And equally, if you look at the reports, the Springs report, like, I found it very difficult to comprehend how something that wasn't certified, wasn't CE standard, was inserted into children. And I got it, you get various communications anonymously and so on saying you've misread it, you were too harsh on the individual consultant when you said certain things within the DOIL. But it's a basic. We have a very sophisticated medical device industry in Ireland where the standards are the highest in the world. We produce hips in this country. We produce all sorts of orthopedic products and so on. And everything is about quality assurance and quality control. Yet in one of our tertiary hospitals, in Springs or an orthopedic hospital, not tertiary, sorry, are inserted into a child with no one. making the assessment, have these gone through a proper process? It's just incomprehensible that that would happen. So to your question, it does raise the most fundamental questions about the entire programme of clinical directorship. And is it working? And it does need to be reviewed. The idea was a good idea. It's actually a good concept and a good idea. But it does depend on everybody working as a team. We've had the dysplasia report now, just in terms of the hips. We have a further report that we're waiting on in terms of the operation of the paediatric spinal service, the NIAGM report. And then we've had the internal inquiry that surfaced via the media, and which was not sent to the HSE, was not sent to the department from what we can establish and verify. And therefore, that report raises a whole series of issues also in terms of the governance question, in terms of safety questions, atmosphere and so on that you've referenced. So taking all of that in its totality, yes, one has to state the obvious, that we need to look fundamentally at the governance of CHI, and we have to move quickly in the short term, as the Minister is, in ensuring two HSE board members are on the board, but then how we evolve that further.
Taoiseach, we're talking here about children sometimes as young as the age of 2, even younger, being operated on. It's absolutely incomprehensible what's happened. The phone line that was set up for parents at the weekend, they rang up. All they were asked for was their contact details. None of the questions that they asked could be answered by the people on the phone line. It's not an acceptable way to treat the parents. You've said that everything needs to be looked at and reviewed, that clinical oversight needs to be reviewed. Are you committing to doing a review of why the system of clinical directors here is failing? When is that review going to start? Can you give us details about it? Don't want you commentating on this. I want you as Taoiseach giving us hard details about what you're going to do in terms of reviewing the failures of clinical oversight here.
I mean, to be fair, the audit was external, which means anything we do will have that reassurance to families in terms of independence, in terms of any external review, and there will be a retrospective review of every case. So that the Minister has already acted, and the Government fully supports the Minister in terms of these series of actions, in terms of, first of all, the priority being the follow-up, clinical follow-up for all those who've had surgery, and supporting their families in that process of retrospective external review of their cases. In addition to that, the Minister is taking immediate steps to strengthen the board of CHI and a stronger support from the HSE in its engagement with CHI. There will have to be accountability on all of these issues. And the Medical Council is there, but also I believe, we have HICO and we have others. We do need, and we will pursue on that basis. But the first priority is to work on making sure that we follow up comprehensively on behalf of the children involved here and their families.
To the Independent Technical Group, Deputy Richard O'Donoghue.
Thank you, Conor. Taoiseach, today I want to talk to you about widows' pensions. And pensions for widows doesn't discriminate. You could be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, any age. But what is worrying for people, and I'm going to tell you one or two stories. I am a mother. I have 3 children. My husband died. We have a house, a mortgage. And I'm in receipt of the widow's pension, which she said, I'm very grateful. But if I go out sick, I cannot, even though I'm a PRSI and POA worker, I don't get sick pay because I'm in receipt of a widow's pension. I'm a father. I have 2 children. My wife passed away due to cancer. I have 1 child in secondary school and I have 1 child in primary school. I worked all my life and I continue to work. I am in receipt of the widow's pension. It doesn't cover the loss that I have of my partner, but it helps me and my family to try and survive. If I'm out of work tomorrow morning, I don't get a payment such as my stamps if I'm out long term, as because I'm in receipt of a widow's pension. Can you please rectify this, that if I'm working and if I am out, which is good, I receive the payment. If I am not working, all the different criteria from different employers only cover you up to X amount of sick days. Then some places will require you to go out on sick pay. But sick pay is based on your PRSI contributions or your stamps. You cannot be in receipt of 2 government payments. This needs to be rectified for the people that are working, and also for the people that are working and if they go out sick that they cannot survive. As I say, they're very thankful of what they've got to help them survive. It doesn't replace their loved one, but it helps them to try and cater for their family. Can the government look at this on a legislation? Can they introduce a legislation that if I can be in receipt of it while I'm working, if I'm out sick, I should also be entitled to my PRSI contributions, which I work to pay for, and also be entitled to my widow's pension? This is what they're asking to know. Can this be sorted out to make sure that my family can survive? These are only some of the cases that have been brought to my attention. So please, Taoiseach, if you could look and answer that, please.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, thank you very much, Deputy Donoghue, for raising this issue. I think you've made a number of fair points. When a widow loses her husband or a husband loses his wife, the costs of running a household don't go down. Very much similar costs, if not additional costs in some respects, depending on age and so on, and how in terms of looking after kids if you're going back out to work. So it creates enormous challenges. It's also a very lonely journey for quite a period of time. And I would say to you that I'll ask the Minister for Social Protection, particularly in the context of the next budget, if he could examine the points that you've raised, look at the various anomalies that potentially exist, because the Social Protection Code it's a broad system. It's many different payments. Some of the policies are interrelated. If you move in one area, there's a ripple effect across the entire social protection system. Although the status of the widow, I think, is one that's worth considering as perhaps being apart from the breadth of social protection payments that people receive. Systems generally in departments are always worried about making exceptions of one particular category of person in receipt. But I think you have raised a number of important issues, and perhaps I'll ask the Minister to engage with you, because maybe you have some other examples, particularly on that sick pay argument, that certainly I will ask the Minister to pursue, and I'll certainly engage with you also and just see, in the context of the budget, are there sensible, practical things that we can do to alleviate the pressure and pain that people go through in such circumstances.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy O'Donoghue.
Thank you, Taoiseach, for your response, and I look forward to meeting the Minister on this. I'm under no illusion there is all different criteria under different payments that the government have to look at under different circumstances. But when it comes to losing a loved one and you're trying to survive, whether you have children or not, there is massive overheads trying to put even with inflation costs that are there at the moment and the challenges that are there ahead of people. It's something that should be legislated for, that if we can help people that are in a situation like that, we do everything we can to help people in that situation. There is other criteria that are more complicated. But to me, if you're a person that's widowed, whether you're working or not working, and you've paid your contributions, your own PSI, it should not matter. It should not interfere with your widow's pension if you're out sick. And that's what I'm trying to bridge that gap, to make sure that a person that if they're out sick, they don't have to worry about that. They're now going to go further and further into debt, which causes worries on the whole family.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
You've raised the issue. I mean, I could, how would I put it? I mean, there is a complexity to the social protection system, and if you move in one area, it can affect others. We're all familiar with, I think, meeting pensioners in particular, or knocking on a door, and a pensioner will say to you, look, I lost my wife last year or whatever, and found it very difficult because essentially the same heating bills, sort of same running expenses, same rent maybe, or same mortgage. So their expenditure costs haven't gone down at all, but their income has been halved in many instances. So I will ask the Minister to look at that, and we'll revert back to you.
And that concludes Leaders' questions. Now, in accordance with Standing Order 35, I call on the Chief Whip, Mary Butler, to move that the